Welcome to No Broken Legs. I am your host, Evan Belfiore. Joining me on the phone on this Monday evening is Jimmy Champ. Jimmy, how are you today?
Man, I'm doing well. It's still pretty cold and snowy here in Northeast Ohio, but I'm doing good. Glad for us to hook up and record tonight and talk some Cavs and some football.
Yeah, we're going to take a look at some of the Super Bowl props, but first we have to talk about the Cleveland Cavaliers. We mainly focus on football throughout the football season, but the Cavs can't be ignored right now, Jimmy, and I followed it a little bit more than you have leading up to now, so you're getting back into it. What is your impression of this Cavs team from what you've observed?
So, like you said, during football season, especially this year, we've really drilled down a lot in football, and I have not followed this Cavs team that seems to be doing really well. They're just made a big trade for Caris LeVert, who we know is a very talented player. But I guess my question is, with the roster they have, how are they doing as well as they are?
I think there are a number of factors, and let's get one of the ones that people generally don't like to talk about out of the way. Teams don't prepare for the Cavs like they do the bigger matchups. It's the regular season. They're not always getting other teams' best shots. That's part of the equation. The other part of the equation is Evan Mobley is a superstar waiting to happen, and Darius Garland has made a tremendous leap forward. And the way Evan Mobley and Jared Allen are able to defend around the basket is something that teams are not used to seeing. I hear a lot. There's a lot of talk about the Cavs possibly being in the NBA Finals, which I think is maybe that's too high an expectation. They're a young team that's never played in the playoffs, and they don't have a legitimate superstar that has won playoff games before. I think they'll get there, but I think if they could make the Eastern Conference Finals, that would just make this a tremendous season. I'd be blown away if that happened.
So, following along as much as I have, and I will let, for those of you that we do get listeners that are not necessarily local to Northeast Ohio. So both our Cavs and our Indians have gone through a thing these past couple of years where a station called Bally Sports has purchased pretty much the rights from Fox Sports, from FS1 for Indians and Cavs game. And then they don't really have a streaming service, and they're not available on all cable platforms. So watching the Cavs is kind of hard. So following along what I watch and what I see in stats, I do see, a resurgence from Jetty, a little resurgence from Kevin Love. I haven't seen how Okoro has progressed this year. But I guess my question is, because the thing that I wonder, because there's so much talk about what the ceiling for this team is. My question is, when they get into an actual series where there's actual preparation against teams with superstars, do you think they can win a big series against, say, Milwaukee or the Nets or the Sixers?
I like their chances against the last two more than the first one.
Well, that's fair.
Because I don't know what Nets team I'm getting. If Kevin Durant's fully healthy, then I worry about their ability to stop him from just being an unstoppable force. Because the Nets have some length that they can throw at Darius Garland, and he struggled a little bit against Milwaukee the first time they played. They just threw Drew Holiday at him, and they threw a lot of doubles, and Drew Holiday's a really good defender, and that's really why the Cavs made the trade they just made, because Caris LeVert can help create some offense when teams are throwing a lot of double teams at Garland. He's somebody that, he's basically a taller, slightly less efficient version of Colin Sexton, to be completely honest.
I like it.
He's instant offense. There's times where he'll explode and take over a game, and he gives them another point in craps to hit when they roll the dice. Because, like you mentioned, Cedi Osman is He's continually disproving the idea that myself and a buddy of ours from high school, Phil Jolliffe, have, that he's not an NBA player, but I'll be damned, he's an NBA player.
Yeah, they just had an absolutely epic comeback here in the last couple of days. And like I said, I can't wait. We've got one more week of the NFL season, and then after that, my focus will be the draft. And then around that time will be NBA playoffs, and I really can't wait. I mean, that's my thing. I think what you hit on is what I'm curious about, is when we get into a series or even late in the season where games really matter, coaches start taking it real serious, rotations start shortening, and teams have to take the Cavs serious, how this young team will perform. I think that will be the telltale. Will they be able to do what Phoenix did last year?
I think that's a little too far for this team. They've never even played in a playoff game before.
Exactly.
And we saw Atlanta make a run last year, but we saw how they sort of had a ceiling that they didn't know they had. They had to go through the process of learning what they didn't know, as they would say. And I would expect the Cavs to maybe do that. I don't like their chances against Milwaukee in a playoff series, but other than the Heat, nobody terrifies me as a Cavs fan.
Yeah.
I think the Cavs can match up with the Bulls pretty well, especially if they're healthy. I mean, all of this, of course, depends on who's healthy. I mean, if the Nets are... when the Nets have their three guys, they're really good, but that doesn't seem to happen very often.
I mean, me, when it comes to spitting some hot takes, sometimes I mean it, sometimes I don't. And I was talking to a fellow Cavs fan who is, like a lot of Cavs fan, would like to punch Kyrie Irving right in the face. And he got he got very mad at me, but also a part of his brain was like, oh shit, is he right? Like, if the Nets played the Cavs in a series, if Kyrie averaged 50 points in Cleveland, I wouldn't be surprised. Like, you might do it on 70 shots, but it wouldn't surprise me one bit. Like, it would not surprise me because he's just that. It wouldn't surprise me at all. But I just can't really wait. Like, I can't wait, to get through these next couple weeks of the NFL season and really start to get into it, figure out a way to watch some Valley sports, and really watch this Cavs team. Watch this Cavs team.
It's frustrating, but that's just sort of the landscape of what the reason that actually it wasn't FS1 that sold the regional networks. It was actually Disney. That was part of the acquisition of 20th Century Fox.
Right.
And to go through the antitrust process that has to be gone through, they had to sell some of that to not have a complete monopoly, because they own ESPN as well, which is the leader in terms of national sports coverage.
Right.
But it's going to be really interesting because the Cavs have a mostly easy schedule moving forward. They do need to get Darius Garland back. He was a game time decision the other night that was a scratch, so hopefully he's back soon, because their offense doesn't look the same without him. They can get some contributions from guys here and there, but we have seen many times before, you have these teams that look really good in the regular season that are every night it's a different guy doing something big and stepping up. That tends to not work very well in the playoffs.
Exactly. And I completely agree with that.
Darius Garland is excellent, and the Garland pick and roll with either Mobley or Allen is just devastating. And with the defense on the back end and the Garland pick and roll, they got a puncher's chance against anybody.
Right. And I know, we've got some all-stars. We got some guys on the squad who will be performing for All-Star Weekend. Now, I have a question for you because, both of us are at times big fans and big skeptics of some of the things that Bill Simmons has to say about athletes, teams, whatever. Bill Simmons this past week really feels like what he's seen from Evan Mobley, the only comp he feels he can make is to a young Tim Duncan, young Kevin Garnett. Do you think that's fair, or is that too much?
I mean, what's fair anymore?
Yeah.
I Evan Mobley is performing as a rookie. He's really only looked like a rookie in maybe one or two games so far, and his ability to defend not just one-on-one and his ability to defend perimeter players while also being able to hold up inside is his ability to rotate, how well he and Allen use their length. I mean, they turned a starting lineup with Larry Markkinen and Colin Sexton, two guys not known for their defense, into one of the best defensive units in basketball.
Right.
And Garland's not a very good defender either. So they don't really have a perimeter stopper outside of Okoro in the guard spots. And it just doesn't matter because they're so good inside. And you asked about, what can teams do to plan for them over the course of a series. That's really the key that we'll have to see what happens. What team can figure out a way to get shots in the restricted area against this Cavs teams when Allen and Mobley are just not letting anybody. I mean, they're averaging more than 3 blocks a game.
Right.
like they're deflecting. I think their deflection rate is they're like combining around 13, 14 shots a night are either deflected or somebody goes up to take a shot and they end up passing it instead of shooting it. Like, it's a pretty broad stat, but still that is getting into the head of the people driving to the basket, and it's bearing results. They're only a game out of the top seed in the East, which just blows my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. It's awesome.
All right, there is just so much going on in the NFL since we last spoke, Jimmy.
Wow.
Brian Flores filed a lawsuit against the NFL, the Denver Broncos, and the New York Giants. We've questioned why more black coaches don't seem to get opportunities to be head coaches in the NFL. What are your thoughts about this, Jimmy? And I guess we'll mention the Hue Jackson stuff after that, but what are your thoughts specifically on Brian Flores' lawsuit? Do you agree with what he's proposing or what he's accusing the NFL and these teams of? And I guess, do you think he'll be successful with his lawsuit?
I don't really know what successful will be for this man in this lawsuit. I don't know what his end game is, what he's expecting. There's no real path of the old boys club that runs the NFL from stopping. So there's a lot of it that you're not going to be able to get rid of, right? Like, we're not surprised by this. We've been talking about it for 2 years. Like, there are a lot of great black coordinators who deserve second chances, a lot of great up-and-coming black coordinators who deserve a chance, who don't get it, while guys who have no business being head coach of any program at all get head coaching jobs in the NFL because they're comfortable around the old boys club. That's what it is. Like, I hated the Denver Broncos response to what he said about Elway. Like, first off, do I believe Elway was drunk and or hungover? Absolutely. But I'm also a Cleveland Browns lifelong fan. So I hate John Elway.
We're not exactly impartial arbiters
of
such things.
But my problem with it was the way the Broncos tried to word it away was, like, Elway apologized and said, if I looked disheveled or whatever, it was because I had taken a red-eye flight all night to get to the interview with Brian Flores that was requested by Brian Flores. They wanted to meet with Brian Flores. The time they gave didn't work. So he said, how about 8 a.m. on this time? And they said, okay. And the day before that interview that was set up, they interviewed like 4 people halfway across the country. And they didn't get out of the last interview until midnight, knowing they were interviewing Brian Flores at 8 a.m., knowing they still had to catch a plane. So you can't tell me that you really gave a shit about the Brian Flores interview if that was the state you were going to go into for that interview, that there was any possible way he was going to get the best versions of yourselves in that interview. There's no way. I believe
that just sounds like they're not just shortchanging Flores in that interview. They're interviewing 4 other candidates, and it feels like maybe the first one is going to get their best, and then the second one's probably going to get around 90% of their best. But those last 2 candidates, along with Flores, are also is bad policy, and probably why the Broncos haven't been particularly good.
Exactly. And then the things with the Giants, yeah, I believe it. I mean, that organization is a dumpster fire. I believe it. Do I believe that the Dolphins tried to pay him to lose? Absolutely. I absolutely believe it. And if he was a white head coach, he would have taken the $100,000 a loss. But as a black head coach, he knows he can't have a losing record. Like, we had a black friend, me and you, we had a black friend correspondent on the show, friend of the show, Luke Anderson, made a post about it. And then an old white guy wearing Washington Redskins shit in his profile picture commented on Luke's post and said, well, if the guy would win, he's fucking 1 game under 500 as a head coach in the NFL with shitty offensive quarterbacks, personnel, situations, everything. And he has won games. He's been innovative, creative. He has won games. And there are people like, well, if he would just win more, he'd still have a job. Well, unfortunately, not everybody gets to be Adam Gase. Not everybody gets the same treatment. And he knew he couldn't afford losing records to ever get to stay as a head coach or be a head coach again. So
that is the accusation that really intrigues me the most, because he says he has like direct evidence as part of his lawsuit, and apparently there's also a witness to such things. That I've heard people say that this could possibly lead to ownership changes in Miami if that charge is proven true, with the way the NFL is setting up partnerships with sports betting. Like, that is in play. I really think that's in play. If he has what he says he has, and so far it seems like he's going through the motions of somebody that has the goods. Unlike former Cleveland Browns coach Hue Jackson, who made some pretty damning allegations of the Cleveland Browns, similar to what Brian Flores said of Miami, and then he goes on ESPN for an interview and promptly backtracks a little bit, and then he goes on CNN and completely backtracks. Like, Hue Jackson just can't help himself, can he?
No, and I think, not that I'm one to, while I like what's happened in the organization recently, we have had our problems with Jimmy Haslam, with the front office personnel that was in place for most of the Hue Jackson run. But, Jimmy Haslam, for once, I had to agree with him when he said, Hue refuses to accept any of the responsibility for the losses that the Cleveland Browns had during his tenure. Now, you and I have talked. I was fortunate enough. My son and I were at Hue Jackson's 1 win. We were at the stadium for a lot of close games. And without Hue Jackson backtracking, I could absolutely say I wouldn't have been surprised if it was true. Because the way Hue Jackson's teams played, they played like they looked like they were trying to lose football games. Hue Jackson was a great coordinator. He was clearly not a leader of men. He had no idea about down, distance, time management, when to challenge, when not to challenge, what to do, what not to do. He was overwhelmed as a head coach, and then amplified that with a shitty roster. But if he wouldn't have backtracked it, I probably would have believed it, because at times it looked like that team was trying to lose games. And now it's like, no, we really were just that bad and that badly coached.
I just remember thinking that the Hue Jackson teams were poorly coached, and that if they were trying to lose games, they weren't doing a very good job of hiding it, because Hue Jackson, those decisions that lost them games, it's not like you could say, oh, well, we were trying some stuff out because we knew we weren't going to be very good, so we figured we'd try some unconventional things to maybe steal a game here or there. But that didn't even make sense. He wasn't even experimenting in a way where he would learn something about the roster or test the limits of how they were progressing.
No.
The other problem in all this is Hue Jackson says lots of things.
Yeah.
And a lot of those things turn out to not be true. And that's a pretty common refrain from people in the Cleveland market, because they dealt with Hue Jackson and they dealt with him lying to them directly.
Yep.
And I don't like defending Jimmy Haslam, He ripped off his best customers at Pilot J, and a lot of the people that were in executive positions under him are now serving jail terms because they violated federal law. But his record in terms of hiring minority candidates is pretty good and definitely better than most of those in the NFL. They've had multiple, I mean, Adam Berry currently, they had Farmer, and look at some of the white coaches that got fired after 1 year. So I just don't, I think Hue's trying to inject himself into this. I think Haslam can be untrustworthy, but not in the wrong in this particular moment because Hue's a liar. I think all those things can be true. The Houston Texans just are reportedly hiring Lovie Smith. After so many white coaches got hired in the thick of this, do you think the league forced the Texans to do that?
So I don't think that the NFL may have forced them to hire Lovie Smith. It would not surprise me if the NFL told them right now you absolutely cannot hire Brian Flores to be your head coach, which seemed to be the path that the Houston Texans were taking in their interview process. Like, that wouldn't surprise me, which is where I come back to, I don't know what Brian Flores' end game is.
I don't know either. I suspect that he wasn't going to get a job, and that's why he filed this lawsuit. But if the Texans were looking to hire Flores, I don't know how that actually all comes together. I think what it really comes down to is Brian Flores willing to sacrifice his coaching career to take a wrecking ball to an unjust system, and it looks like he is.
Hey, we're all for that, right?
Yeah, I'm. I mean, if he's been a coach for a while, NFL coaches are well paid. He's in a situation, and if he has the goods like he says he has, then he's probably going to be well compensated before this is all finished.
Yeah, I agree. Like, it's going to be very interesting. You know, the NFL is doing their best to ignore it. A lot of people were really taken aback, and it left a really poor taste. A lot of people with a really poor taste in their mouth on the morning after everything happened. The NFL network, there was no mention of any of it, which kind of makes sense, but it also makes you look like you're hiding. That is where it's bad. On the plus side, my man Lovie Smith got to be a head coach.
Yeah, it's nice to see him get another opportunity. I don't know how well it's going to work out for him there because that roster isn't very good. Yeah. And I don't know what we see with another season of what's the young man they had playing quarterback? Davis Mills. Yeah. I don't know. We'll see how it works out for him. The Miami Dolphins hired Mike McDaniel. Do you like that hire, Jimmy?
It doesn't surprise me that Mike McDaniel got a head coach job. And I do wonder, though, like for the Dolphins, hire Mike McDaniel does identify as biracial, mixed. They get that advantage. But then you also get somebody who's from the Shanahan coaching tree, who you might think is a little bit more prone to be okay with the old boys club. Maybe. I don't know. Maybe just a little bit. Because, you know, we know the 49ers offense has been very good, but they've been very good because the general manager and the head coach work hand in hand to pick the pieces to make it work.
Well, it is the Flores lawsuit, something that's going to be dominating the news in the off season, but it's also going to be a slow process because federal lawsuits take forever. So it's definitely something we'll be looking at. We will be back with more player props and Super Bowl. We'll be looking at football, the actual football on the field. Jimmy, thank you for joining me to discuss some of the just a lot of stuff going on in the sports world.
No place I'd rather be, brother.
All right, and we thank you for listening. We'll be back with our Super Bowl picks and player props coming up here at No Broken Legs.